Hey folks, Randy Newberg here. Hope you're doing well. Apologize, I got a bit of a sinus infection, so I sound a little stuffed up, but I think we're going to go over a really useful piece of information today. It's a question we get a lot, and here's kind of the summary of the question. Randy, which of these many general units in this state should I focus on? So we're going to walk through the process of how we decide which unit of all the general units in whatever state we have a tag we're going to hunt. And in many states, you draw a general tag, and I'm mostly thinking of Montana and Wyoming, where in Wyoming the code is GEN. So when you do that, there's dozens of units you can pick from. In Montana, as a non-resident, you have to first draw the general tag. And if all you have is a general tag, well, I think we've got almost 100 general units that you can pick from. And then if you go to Idaho, you've got some region-based tags we buy as non-resident region elk tags. And within that region, there might be 3 to 6 or 7 units that make up that region that you got to think about. And then there's the last one, Colorado has, 80 units that you can hunt over the counter. Well, which of those 80 units are you going to hunt? That's the question that I hope we can answer. What area should I hunt and why? My approach is, the first thing I do is I filter the data. This is a very data-intensive step number one. I filter all the data to arrive at however many units I can find that are general units or over-the-counter units that I'm allowed to hunt and meet my criteria of what I'm looking for. And in a minute, I'll get into what that criteria is that I look for. And then once I do that, I usually have a bundle of units that met my criteria. Then the last step I always go to is I pore over maps. Like, I'm spending so much time on my digital maps right here saying, all right, which of these have the topography and the geography that appeals to my hunting style? And after going through all that, that's usually where I end up is, okay, I had 5 to start with. This one ends up being the one that fits my hunting style best. That's where I'm probably going to be. But let's walk through that. So the things that I'm going to look at are a few primary things. I think there's about 5 of them that I'm going to go through here. And whenever I look at something, I'm mostly looking at long-term trends, especially when we're talking about things like success rates. Because you might have really favorable weather for a high harvest in one year or really unfavorable weather. And if you only looked at that one year, it could skew where you think the harvest success rate is. It could skew it higher or skew it lower. So I try to look at least 5 years if at all possible. So one of the things you're going to notice is how much of this that I look at that you're going to be able to just have right at your fingertips with GoHunt's Insider Filtering 2.0. It's really, really helpful. There's a few other things you might have to get from the agency. But very first thing is I want to look at what the success rate has been for the last 5 years. And when I do that, I'm going to pay attention to a couple things. I want to make sure that the success rate, if I have a bull tag, I want to look at the success rate for bulls. Or if I have a cow tag, I want to look at the success rate for cows. Because some states blend that together. And when they do that, when they just say success rate, and they don't distinguish it between bulls and cows, usually that's going to skew the cow success rates lower, and it's going to skew the bull success rates higher. So I want to make sure I'm looking at what is the success rate for whatever species or whatever gender I'm allowed to hunt. In most cases, it's probably going to be bull elk. Now there's another thing that I look at, and this gets me into step 2, or criteria number 2. That is the percentage of public land. Obviously, I want a place that's at least, I usually say 50% public land or more. But I also want to pay attention to, is most of this harvest, or is this, if my harvest success rates are really high. But I look and see that, oh boy, there's a lot of public land there, but it's not good quality habitat. Most good quality habitat's on the private land. Well, that means my public land success rates are probably way lower than what I expected, because my private land success rates have brought that up higher, that average across the unit. And in most states, they do not bifurcate or separate what the success rate is on public versus what it is on private. So there's a lot of reasons why I want to look at the percentage of public land. One of them being what I just explained. The other one is that sometimes if I look at that, it's like, okay, yeah, the unit is 60% public land, but there's only 2 access points. Well, that means those 2 access points are going to be really, really crowded. Are there ways I can get away from that? Are there other places I can go? Because all public land isn't necessarily created equal. So as a general rule, I'm looking at just what is the percent of public land. That's my first starting point. But then I want to get a little more granular in how I look at that. The third thing I look for is what is the bull to cow ratio? And usually in the wintertime, after hunting season, the agencies go do their flights and they report back, well, post-hunt, we had X number of branch antlered bulls per 100 cows. And the bull to cow ratio is usually reported in a percent or a ratio of mature bulls to cows. And I try to look for something that is 30 bulls per 100 cows or above. I'll even go down as low as 20. But some of these units in the West, these general units who get hunted really hard, they might be down in the 10 or teens or some even in the single digits. I get those off my map. It has to be 20 or higher, and I'm hoping for 30 or higher. Now, if you get higher than 30 bulls per 100 cows, that one is definitely going to make my list. Then a lot of states are able or ask the question in their harvest surveys whether or not the bull is 6 points or greater, 6 points per side. Well, why is this important? It's not absolutely critical, but it gives me a pretty good feel of what the age class might be in that unit. Because if you think about a bull elk, you know, his calf year has no antlers. When he's a year old or year and a half old, he's a spike. And then the next year, he's what we call a raghorn or a 4x4, 4x5. Then the next year, well, he might become a 6 point, but he's probably a 5 point. And then when he's 4.5 or older, that's usually when he gets to be a 6 point. So it's not that that's the only thing I'm focused on, but when I have some of these general units and I look at it and it says, well, the percentage of 6 point or better are only 12%. Well, what I know is that place is getting hammered. I know there's heavy hunting pressure. I know the age class is not what I expect. If it's around 30 to 40%, somewhere in between there, it's going to start making my list of criteria. If it gets 50% or above, it's definitely going to be on my list. So that tells me if it's 50% or higher, 1 out of every 2 bulls, or maybe even better than that, is a 6 point. And that means there's a pretty good age class there. So if I've already seen that there's a good bull to cow ratio and the percent of harvest that's 6 point or better is high, all of a sudden I'm starting to focus on that. And then the last one, this is one that might be harder to find. The reason I list it last is it doesn't necessarily drive as much of my opinion or my desirability of a unit. That is calves per 100 cows. So kind of like they measure mature bulls per 100 cows, they also measure calves per 100 cows. And most of the scientists and biologists, most of the studies will say that if you have 30 calves per 100 cows, you have a herd that's at least maintaining, maybe growing. You start getting down 20 or below, that herd is in decline. I'm probably not going to want to hunt that herd. Now, since it's harder to find that data, sometimes you might have to call the agency or call the biologist in that unit. It's not the top of my list of criteria, but it's definitely something I think about because it just tells me, is there heavy predation? Is there poor quality habitat? Or is it doing super great? There's been burns or treatments on the landscape where the habitat is great. It's kind of that one thing that might nudge a unit even further up, but it's probably not going to cause me to disqualify a unit if the other 4 criteria are pretty good. So that's my first step. I go through those 5 things, and when I'm all done with that, usually through filtering, I'm going to come up with anywhere from, usually when I do it, I get 3 to 6 units now that are kind of met my criteria. All right, these are ones I'm interested in. And then I go to this last step. And some of you might think that this is kind of weird because it's not very scientific. I go and I open up the maps and I look at every bit of all of these. Let's say I had 5 units that met my criteria. I'm looking at maps of every part of it. Yeah, I'm looking at the public-private, but I'm also looking at the topography, the geography, how roaded is it, how much wilderness there is. There's a whole lot of other things I'm going to look at, and this is where it becomes a little more of an art than a science. And here's why I'm doing it, or why I'm doing it, and what I'm looking for. I know what terrain, what topography, what geography, what land ownership pattern best fits my hunting style. And some of you might say, well, who cares if it fits my hunting style? If it's a good unit, I'm going to go there. Well, over the years, what I've learned is I'm really a better hunter when it's country where I can glass, where I can get away from a lot of people by hiking in, 2, 3, 4 miles, and I can do spot and stock. So putting these 5 units in front of me, if one of them really has the terrain and is laid out the way that fits my hunting style that I'm best at, I'm probably going to have success rates above the average. Now, if this is a unit that doesn't fit my hunting style, it's really heavily timbered and there may be a lot of roads or whatever, I'm probably going to be below the average based on where my skill set is in my preferred hunting style. So you and I might sort the same 5 units using the same criteria, but you might have a different hunting style than I do. Or maybe you're looking at it for archery season instead of rifle season, and there's going to be some difference there in how that unit is going to lay out for your hunting style. So just because we had the same 5 units through the search criteria doesn't mean we're going to pick the same unit based on what fits our hunting style and the season type that we're hunting in. So that's how we do it here, folks. It's not any more complicated than that. We've lucked out and we live in a state with a lot of general units in Montana. We apply for the general tag very often down in Wyoming. We've had region-wide tags in Idaho, and we do the over-the-counter units in Colorado quite a bit. So this is the process we use. I hope you find this helpful. And whatever you do, go out there and get an elk tag. Even if it's just a general elk tag or an over-the-counter elk tag, you're out there hunting, you're learning, you're making mistakes, and hopefully you're having success and you're a better elk hunter because of that. Thanks for watching.